Before we get started, I want to make a few notes about some videos that I've already put out that are related to this content. The first of which is the coupe window belt replacement. That whole process that I put in that video has been revised several times, new materials tested that have now been on the car for a year, exposed to the elements, and I'm excited to say that I have a pretty sound solution for that coupe window sweep. That video will come down, the whole process rewritten, revised, put in video format, and that video will be up as soon as I can. Also, reference my door disassembly video to figure out how to get the belt moldings off of the car so that you can do this process that I'm about to show you. We are going to go over how to fully disassemble this metal molding so that you can paint it like I did, or you can send it off to get re-chromed. I'm then going to show you how I rebuilt the rubber sweeps using materials and tools that can be found and purchased online. I will provide you every detail and every part number for the materials that you'll need, so grab some snacks, sit back, and enjoy the following video. We're going to have to remove some rivets, so depending on which method you prefer, you're going to need a drill and a 3/16 spot weld removing bit. If this is the method you use, you may also need a set of pliers to hold the back of the rivet in case it starts spinning. I ended up using a burr grinder to grind off the head of the rivet. A small belt sander may work if you can avoid damaging the backing. I would have plenty of razor blades on hand, as well as some masking tape. Please use a high-grade masking tape that will prevent soak through of the primer that we're going to be using. It helps to have a water-based paint marker to aid in your measuring, marking, and cutting of the rubber. An important product I would not go cheap on is this 3M gray 1/4 inch wide double-sided tape. You need some adhesive remover of some kind. I like to use foaming glass cleaner for general cleaning of the parts in rubber. And you're definitely going to need some adhesion promoter. All of my material testing was done using 3M 05907. Don't forget to bring some snacks to the party because this is going to take a while. One very critical material that you need is this soft felt strip that we're going to be using as a buffer between the glass and the rubber. I found this seller on eBay. This was the third material that I tested. It's held up for over a year, and you can see their information on the business card. ClassTechCars.com. You'll need a good quality set of scissors for cutting the thick cloth material that this felt is attached to. You're going to need some body filler spreaders or something similar for smoothing out the adhesive that we're using that's cheap and you can throw away. We did all of the adhesive work for this project with 3M window weld, part number 08609. It's in a tube that can go into a regular caulk gun. You'll also need some of these daubers for applying the primer that we're using. For this, I use Sika brand primer 207. You're going to need a heat gun or another method to apply controlled heat to the rubber. A gray 3M Scotch-Brite pad. You're going to need a few of these acid brushes for when we apply some adhesive in a very narrow area. Also, for applying the primer in that narrow area, a finer bristle brush like a modeling brush is going to be very useful. You'll need a way to install rivets, preferably just a regular hand riveter like this one. The rivets that we will be installing, you want to make sure that they are aluminum rivets. The Alveco 16834 was the perfect rivet to fit the existing hole. They are 1/8 inch in diameter, 3/16 in length. You want to have plenty of microfiber rags to work with these parts so you're not scratching your chrome moldings. This windshield adhesive is extremely messy, so you'll want to have plenty of rags laying around so you can just replace them in case you make a mess. You also definitely need to wear some gloves when working with this adhesive. The rubber that we're actually replacing this sweep with is the same size molding that you saw me use in my back glass molding solution video. This part number UM1913BR is a 75-foot roll easily found online. This is the Flexline brand 19mm universal molding. You can find it through other sellers online in shorter lengths, but your best deal by the foot is to buy the 75-foot roll. That flex line molding has a small metal filament inside, so it helps to have a very sharp, very small set of diagonal cutters or wire snips to help make a very clean cut through that rubber and filament. I'm also going to detail a process later in the video that you may need a set of wide jaw sheet metal flanging pliers like the one shown here. The first thing we have to do is some disassembly of the belt molding. You're going to start by gently removing the rubber cap that's at the rear end of the molding. You want to save these pieces because you're going to reinstall them later. This is going to serve as a spacer between the molding and the paint. It also closes in a hollow gap that's on the back side of the door. If this piece is missing, it really doesn't make a big cosmetic difference with everything finally assembled. The same goes for the thin rubber strip that goes down the entire length of the bottom of the molding. I did not reinstall that piece, and I've not been able to find a material to replace it. Our next step in disassembly is some very tricky rivet removal. Take a close look at the general construction of this belt molding. You will see that it's made up of two main pieces, the outer metal belt molding itself, and then the rubber sweep is actually attached to what I'm going to refer to as the backing. You'll see on the backing that there are actually two sweeps, an upper and a lower. That lower sweep keeps your glass stable as it's rolling up and down, and also kind of holds the top of the glass when the window is all the way in the down position. So deleting the entire backing piece is not really an option. You need that stability to the glass. The backing piece shown in this video clip is with the upper sweep already cut off. The backing itself has a metal strip built inside of it, and there's a point where the edge of the metal stops and the rubber for the upper sweep starts. You want to run a razor blade right along the top of that metal edge and remove all of that rubber sweep from the top. I cut my sweeps off after I had already removed the rivets and separated the backing from the molding. It may be possible or even easier to make this cut while it's still attached to the molding. Just be careful not to scratch your chrome. The rivet removal is tricky because you want to avoid damaging that lower sweep. To get access to the head of the rivet with a drill bit, you would have to hold the edge of that lower sweep out of the way to prevent chewing it up. If the rivet starts spinning during that process, you're going to need a third hand to grab a hold of that rivet from the back side. This is why I did the burr grinder method, so that I could hold the sweep out of the way with one hand while gently and slowly grinding away at the head of the rivet. This is the type of burr grinding bit that I used with this die grinder to get those heads removed. Then it's just a matter of grabbing the rivet from the back side and twisting and pulling until you can pull it through the back. Now with the backing out of the way, we can roughly cut out the length of the rubber molding that we're going to be replacing that sweep with. Go ahead and make it slightly too long. We can always do a final trim later before we glue it on. The flex line molding that we're using comes preloaded with a butyl strip inside the channel. We have to make sure we clean 100% of that butyl strip out. We want direct contact with our adhesive to the pieces. I did this by scraping most of it out with a pocket screwdriver. You don't want that butyl gumming up your razor blade on our next cut, so getting as much of it out as you can will be beneficial. I made this next cut by placing the channel onto a wooden paint mixing stick, keeping pressure on the top side of the molding, and running the razor blade down the opposite side of the stick. We want there to be a small amount of the channel remaining. This will aid in making sure we install this molding nice and straight. It's not necessary at this point to go ahead and cut the recesses on the lip to clear the pillar molding on the door or the front molding. I would wait until we've actually glued this piece onto the molding to make a final trim cut later. Also, the notches you see cut out along the inside of the channel, that's not necessary either. This was just part of my process for initially getting everything sized up, and I had to clear the brackets to see how much rubber I wanted to overlap onto the molding. As it turns out, the FlexLine 19mm molding gives us the perfect amount of overlap if we put the remaining part of that channel directly against the inside edge of the molding. We end up with the outer edge of the new rubber complementing the body line on the molding itself, and also giving us the proper width of the lip up against the glass that mimics the OEM appearance. There's one area at the rear of the molding where the inner edge steps out slightly. All we have to do is completely remove the channel flush with the rest of the rubber so that we can keep a straight line all the way to the back of the molding. molding. You want this cut to be clean, so use a fresh razor blade. Also, the FlexLine 19mm molding has a small metal filament built into it. If you can locate that filament with the edge of the razor blade, it will actually assist you in getting a nice, clean, flush cut. At this point, I used a small pair of diagonal cutters to cut through that filament and remove the rest of the channel. We only have to remove that last couple of inches or so to clear that step out at the back side of the molding. At this point, double check for cleanliness. You want to make sure 100% of the butyl that used to be inside that channel is gone. We've been handling this rubber a lot. You don't want any oils from your skin to still be on the surface of that rubber. I would use glass cleaner to make sure that there are no oils left over. I would then come back with adhesive remover to make sure that there is absolutely no butyl still on there. It also wouldn't hurt to give it a gentle scuffing with a gray scuff pad. You're then going to want to prep the surface that we're going to be sticking to the molding with adhesion promoter. I would simply spray the adhesion promoter onto a microfiber towel and gently wipe across until you don't see any more black come off of the rubber. Be thorough with this process. Even though the adhesive tape that we're about to put on is not the permanent adhesive meant to hold the rubber in place, it is meant to stay there forever. You don't want any peeling back, especially at the ends of the new rubber. You also want to make sure the molding itself is clean. That entire surface on the top inner edge needs to be adhesion promoted as well. Next, you want to apply your double-sided tape to the molding. Your placement needs to be very precise. You don't want any double-sided tape showing out past the edge of the new rubber. You should be staying at least 1 millimeter away from the very edge of that slight body line that's on the top of that molding. Make sure you're using the correct type of double-sided tape. The gray 3M tape is thinner and less likely to be seen. Once your tape has been applied, you want to remove any excess tape that is hanging off of the inner edge of the molding. Use a fresh razor blade, and with a correct angle, you want to make sure you're cutting it perfectly flush with that edge. Also following that little step out at that last 2 inches. I can't stress enough how clean you have to make this cut, making sure it's perfectly even with the edge of the molding. Remember, we are depending on that inner edge of the molding to line up perfectly with the remaining portion of the channel on the rubber. Any adhesive tape that's protruding past that edge is going to interfere with us getting a perfectly straight line. Make sure your rubber surface is still clean and you've applied adhesion promoter. To stick this onto the tape, don't go ahead and rip off the red protector just yet. You want to hold it on a section at a time, kind of feeling when you have that remaining portion of the channel up against the edge of the belt molding, and just peel off a couple of inches at a time, making sure you keep everything perfectly straight as you go along. We are depending upon this tape to keep everything nice and straight while we do the rest of the adhesive process from the backside, so it's very critical that we get this right. Once your new rubber has been taped onto the molding, it's common for the lip of the rubber to have some wrinkles in it. This is just because it was rolled up inside that box. All you have to do is set the molding down to where the rubber's not touching anything. Treat it with the heat gun. Don't get it too hot. You don't want to burn the rubber. Gently warm it up from one end to the other and let it cool off naturally. You may have to repeat this process a few times, but try to get as many wrinkles out as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point, but it will help to go ahead and get most of the wrinkles out. Our next step is to make another trim to the remaining portion of that channel we cut off. You're going to want to cut along the inside of the metal molding and try to trim off any of that channel that is protruding past that edge. We want it as flush as we can so it doesn't interfere with reinstalling the backing piece later. This will make more sense at that time. Trimming rubber will dull a razor blade faster than you think, so don't be scared to grab a fresh one halfway through the process. Try to cut at an angle that's the same as the angle of the inside edge of the metal molding. Also try to avoid catching the outer lip of the new rubber. Give everything on the backside a good thorough cleaning. You don't want any dirt messing up our adhesive process. The area that we're going to be applying our fuzzy felt material to, we don't want to get anything on that at this point, so mask that area off. Also at the rear edge of the molding, you can see how I masked off anywhere I didn't want to get the adhesive, but I did leave a little bit of exposed area so I can glue that last couple of inches to the molding itself. Go ahead and lightly scuff our areas with the gray Scotch-Brite pad, then come back with the adhesion promoter and a microfiber towel and clean those areas thoroughly. In preparation for applying the adhesive, go ahead and cut some thin strips out of your body filler spreaders. You're going to want a few of them in varying varying widths. We have to get into some tight areas to smooth out the urethane once we apply it. Also have some adhesive remover and some rags just in case you need a quick cleanup. You also want to avoid getting adhesive on these brackets, so get some masking tape on those as well. Anytime we're about to use this windshield urethane, you first want to apply the primer for it. Applying the primer should be done in smooth strokes with very little back and forth motion. You don't want it to clump up and be thicker in some areas than others. This would probably be done best using the fine bristle modeling brush, but you can see here I used the dauber and made it work. You don't want to have to pass back over an area you've already primered, especially after it is dried. You will just create clumps. Always follow the technical data sheet for whatever product you decide to use, but typically most primers, you're ready to put urethane on it within minutes. Cut the tip on your urethane applicator to where you lay about a 1/4 inch bead all the way down the edge of that rubber. It doesn't have to be pretty because we're going to be smoothing this out by hand anyway. Now you're going to start smoothing this out with your little strips that you cut out. It's just like putting icing on a cake. There's nothing to it. If you get a buildup of excess urethane, just have a rag handy, wipe it off of your spreader, and keep smoothing stuff out. Keep in mind, depending on what type of windshield urethane you go with, you may have a work time between 20 minutes to a couple of hours. I would definitely try to get all of this smoothing out done within 15 minutes. Also, keep in mind you're going to have to do all of your tape removal before it's come to a complete cure, which shouldn't be a big problem. But definitely don't leave the masking tape in place while the adhesive cures. Take the tape off as soon as you're satisfied with your spreading work. Here's a closer view of the spreading after removing the tape. You can see we're not trying to build up a whole lot, but we are trying to make sure we get good surface contact on the metal molding and making sure that a little bit of this urethane wraps around the side of that channel that we cut off. This is only the first adhesive application, and it's basically going to make sure the molding cannot pull away sideways from the molding. You'll also notice at the very end where I kind of bridged the gap between rubber and molding on that last 2 inches where we don't have a channel to connect to anymore. At this point, I would wait a minimum of 8 hours before moving on to the next step. Once we reinstall that backing with the lower sweep on it, it gets more difficult to work on the felt. So that really needs to be the next step in the process, is to install the felt to the back of the rubber lip. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and do the heat gun process again and get the lip as straight as possible. The straighter you can get that rubber lip, the better the final appearance is going to be when it's squished up against the glass. If you can get it the way it looks in this video clip, you're doing pretty well. That's probably good enough. To get ready for this process, go ahead and cut out some strips of felt. You can see this material has individual rows, kind of like cut pile carpet, so you should be able to guide your scissors right down those rows and make a nice straight cut. You're trying to make a strip about 1/2 inch wide. It's optional whether you want this felt strip to come all the way to the edge of the rubber lip. If you want it to sit away from the edge to where you don't see it from outside of the car, I would not leave more than 1 millimeter gap. You want it to be close enough to make sure it gets contact with the glass. Any more than 1 millimeter from the edge and you won't make contact. Depending on when you want to make your final cuts, it may be a good idea to go ahead and test fit the molding to the car to make those recesses for the rear pillar and the front molding. This can also be done after the felt is installed or after the backing has been put back on. Once again, we're going to make sure our surface is clean. We're going to gently scuff with a gray Scotch-Brite pad and then clean thoroughly with the adhesion promoter and a microfiber towel. You want to be very careful with your masking to make sure you don't end up with any primer that spills over the edge of that lip. We just want to mask out the area where we're applying our primer and urethane where the felt strip is going to go. You need to do your best to apply the primer extremely smoothly. It's very critical that you don't get any clumps. When we apply our urethane on this area, the same thing applies. We want everything to be nice and tight and smooth. If you end up with areas where the urethane is thicker than others, this will look like lumpy or wavy areas on the exterior when this project's complete. To accomplish a smooth application of the primer, get the dauber not dripping wet, but wet enough to where you can get this done and fully covered in one pass. You can see I also have my felt strips laid out on that piece of tape. You also want to apply primer on the cloth back of those felt strips. The best way I found to do this was just lightly dab it across that cloth. You don't want it on so wet that it soaks through. You don't want it to clump up so much that it fills the texture in of that cloth. You want the urethane to kind of have that texture for something to bite to. While your primer is drying, go ahead and prepare you some more strips of your spreaders. Again, you want a pretty narrow cut tip on your urethane applicator. You're going to apply a very thin bead, and when you spread that urethane out across the rubber, try to get full coverage and then come back and make one final pass nice and tight. You want it to wipe on thinner than when we spread out the urethane when we initially glued on the rubber to the molding. Your goal is to make that final wipe with the urethane one continuous pass from start to finish all the way across that rubber strip. Here's a detailed view of what you're going for. A nice, even, tight wipe from one end to the other with no breaking points, nowhere you had to stop and restart. Keep an eye on your working time from the time you first started applying the urethane to smoothing it out to removing the tape and then getting the felt strip laid in place perfectly. You need to get all that done within 20 minutes. I didn't even want to spend the time to set the camera back up, but you simply remove the tape and gently lay that felt cloth onto that lip, kind of support the outer side of the rubber with your fingers as you kind of smash that cloth into the urethane a little bit. Again, have some adhesive remover and some fresh rags handy in case you get a little bit of urethane onto the felt face. We definitely don't want any urethane to be on that felt when we're done. Before leaving these to sit for the recommended 8 hours for the urethane to cure, you might want to just take a close look at your rubber edge. Make sure everything is still fairly straight. If it's not, go ahead and hit it with a heat gun. It's not going to hurt anything, but you want them to be fairly straight at this point. Once the urethane cures, it's going to hold that shape, so just double check it, make sure it's okay. Then let them chill overnight, wait till the next day to do this next step. What you want to do at this point is kind of do some test fitting of the backing piece. You want to make sure all the rivets are going in their holes. Maybe you have to do a little reaming out of the hole. I know I had to on just a couple of the holes on mine. And you want to make sure that the top edge of that backing piece is not being interfered with by our first run of urethane that we spread out. If you got it too thick in some areas, the backing piece might not sit exactly the way it's supposed to. It's also preferable that there's a little bit of a gap between the backing piece and that first run of urethane. What we're going to end up doing is adding more urethane into that gap between the backing piece and that first run of urethane, essentially gluing a portion of that channel to the backing piece. This is to restrict vertical movement in the rubber when the glass is rolled upwards and it pushes up on that rubber. Let's roll this back and recap. So here's your metal belt molding. Here are the brackets that are permanently attached to it. We got our double-sided tape on there. We installed our rubber piece. We then put that first run of urethane shown in blue here. We also installed our felt strip, but that's not shown in this animation. When we install this backing piece, if there's too much of that blue, your backing piece ends up going on crooked. If you try to force the backing piece into position, you'll end up pushing a big lump in the top of your rubber. So if there's too much of that urethane, you need to cut it away with a razor blade to where it does not interfere with the backing going into place. We're going to fill that gap by pushing our urethane applicator directly into that crack and try to get some urethane inside of that area. We're also going to pile some up and smooth it out like we've been doing. This is going to bond the edge of the rubber directly to the backing piece and prevent any upward movement when the glass pushes up on the lip. So go ahead and get that backing riveted back onto the molding and get ready for the next step. A good way to keep the molding in good position is to go ahead and snap in your belt molding clips and tape them together as shown. This keeps everything in an upright position. You want to mask off the lower and the upper sweep. We don't want to get any primer or urethane onto that felt surface. Because we're applying our primer in such a narrow area, I recommend using the modeling brush for this. I put the primer on fairly wet at first and then came back with a final stroke to kind of mash it down into that crack. When you're ready to apply your urethane, cut your applicator tip to a fairly narrow point. Try to push some of that urethane into the crack on your first pass. Go ahead and use your spreader to try and push some of that urethane into the crack as well. You can also use this technique instead of using the spreader. You can use an acid brush, sweeping down that crack with one hand and pushing on the back of the bristles with the other hand. Then lay another bead on top of that and smooth it out. You can actually lay it quite thick on this pass. Your glass is only going to touch the outer few millimeters of the lip, so you can actually build that urethane up 4 or 5 millimeters if you want to. The main thing is to keep the thickness as even as possible where it contacts the backside of the lip that we just installed. Make sure to remove your tape as soon as you're done spreading. You don't want the tape to stay in place while the urethane cures. Be careful when removing the tape. Make sure no wet urethane from the edge of the tape gets on any of the felt that we installed. Inspect everything very thoroughly. If you see any urethane in places you don't want it to be, clean it off with adhesive remover and a microfiber towel. Here is a detailed view of how everything should look when we are done. Notice how this last run of urethane makes a nice straight line right up against the edge of the new felt strip and also overlaps onto the backing piece, getting plenty of contact area. Even overlapping those rivets a little bit is fine. After you've let that last run of adhesive cure, if you want to install the cap that goes at the rear end of the molding, make sure you clean it thoroughly with adhesion promoter. Brush on a little bit of the urethane primer. Put a small amount of the windshield urethane on there and clamp it in place. You can also use tape to hold it in place, but I had these nice little plastic clips that allowed me to see exactly where it was going to end up. Just be precise with your placement and make sure you get it in the right spot. After that urethane is cured, you can optionally go back behind it and add a little more urethane just to make sure it never moves. Before you install your belt molding, I'm going to show you an operation that will help you to get an even amount of flare across that lip. This will improve the final appearance and give you the best functionality out of your new rubber. If you look closely at the shape of your glass, from the front to the back, it makes a very straight line. The top edge of the door may be curved outward like you see here on my passenger side, to where it's further away from the glass in the middle. We want to try and correct this by bending that edge inward to where it makes as straight a line as possible. I did this with a set of wide jaw flanging pliers, also might be called sheet metal bending pliers. I protected the edge of my paint with a microfiber towel, grabbed a hold of that edge and pushed inward. You want to try not to roll the edge over, but try to just get it to move laterally toward the middle of the car and get that line as straight as possible. Here I'm showing you a measurement I took on the passenger side before the modification, showing that distance between the inner and outer edges at 1¼ inches. And you can see on the driver's side after modification, we took about 1/8 inch off of that width. Performing this modification can prevent the problem shown in this video clip where the glass is catching the edge of the rubber. This problem can also be caused by not having your felt laid close enough to the edge of the rubber. In this case, moving the edge of that door in that extra 1/8 inch made all the difference in the world in that operating correctly. If everything's been done correctly, then you should have an even amount of flare of that lip up against the glass, and the glass should not catch the edge of the rubber as shown in this video clip. When you're ready to install your belt molding back to the door, I'd recommend using any unbroken OEM clips towards the rear end of the belt molding. Make sure when you snap it on, you can positively hear the tabs snapping into place. Refer to my door disassembly video on my YouTube channel to see how to completely disassemble and reassemble the door on this coupe. The next thing I recommend you do is go ahead and reassemble everything, especially the interior trim panel, because there is an inside sweep that kind of helps keep the glass pushed outward against our new rubber. We want to leave it assembled with the window in the up position for several days, I would say, just to kind of give the rubber a initial forming to where that flare kind of wants to stay flared up the way it should be. The rubber will retain its memory, so if the window is left down for a long period of time, it will flatten out again. For this reason, I would recommend just not leaving the window all the way in the down position for longer than a few hours at a time. I'd also recommend, while you're in here doing all this, to make sure your regulator is adjusted properly so your glass is in the proper position and it doesn't jab against the weather strip that surrounds the glass. Refer to my door disassembly video for that process. I want to go ahead and discuss one thing about this project that I am not 100% satisfied with, and that is the clips that hold the belt molding to the door. These clips are discontinued from Acura for both the coupe and the sedan versions of that clip. I also have not found any aftermarket source for either one of those clips. The closest clip that I have been able to find so far is a clip that is used for older Accords and Odysseys. This clip is available OEM, but since I knew it was not going to be an absolute perfect fit, I wanted to do all the testing with some aftermarket clips. I was able to find a white nylon style clip from Alveco, who makes very good replicas of OEM clips with comparable quality. I also bought some extremely cheap Chinese manufactured blue clips shown here, 100 of them for less than $16 shipped, so I didn't have very high hopes. When I first popped both of these clips into the molding, they actually fit their placements very well. However, you see the white nylon clip will flex very easily out of position, and the two teeth on the two outer tabs don't exactly fully snap into place. I was also not happy about the way that the white tabs stuck down past the edge of the molding, more so than the blue clips did. The blue clips actually held a little stiffer in place when I would flex downward. You have to understand that once the sweep is installed to the molding, that glass wants to push up against the molding. So these clips have to hold very sturdy. I was surprised that the cheapest clip available was the one that was fitting the best so far, but I still was not 100% satisfied because you can see the side tabs on that one did not fully snap to the outer edge either. So the next thing I tried was to try and reform the plastic using heat to get a better fit. In this video clip, I'll show you exactly how I did that. I was able to hold the clip with pliers and apply pressure to the inside tabs of the clip with a screwdriver, all with one hand. That way with the other hand I could apply heat with a heat gun. Once I felt like I had spread those tabs out with the heat, I then sprayed it with the glass cleaner to flash cool that plastic so that it would freeze in that position. I tried this heat shaping process on both styles of clips that I had bought. The white nylon clips were not able to be heat shaped quite as well as the blue ones. Again, I was surprised at the quality of plastic that was used. I will mention though, because they are cheap clips, there are some rough spots around the casting edges. You're going to want to inspect the blue clips closely to see if those casting edges are there. You can try to trim away the excess plastic, but I would just chuck it and look for one that didn't have all that. They were very inconsistent, so if you have one that doesn't heat shape and it doesn't snap in very well, just get rid of it and grab the next one. Any clips that hold the best, you want them at the rear of the door. If you have any OEM clips that didn't break when you uninstalled the molding, definitely want to use those at the rear end of the molding. The front end is held in place by the little triangular trim molding pretty well, so you don't have to worry about the front coming up as much as the back. Throughout the process of testing this sweep replacement, I ended up breaking a lot of the tabs off of my old OEM clips and I didn't have any left. So I went ahead and did all blue clips on both sides of the car so that I could test this method out over time. You can see in this video clip it does technically work and everything does positively snap into place. Because these clips are not the specific clip designed for the car, there is still a slight amount of play. When the glass is rolled all the way up and you have the maximum pressure of the glass pushing against the new sweep, you can detect the molding being pushed up, maybe 1 to 2 millimeters. It simply does not fit as tightly as it should. I have a couple of ideas that I could try in the future to overcome this. One would be to trim some more plastic from the top side of that plastic clip and possibly gluing it in place so that it sits deeper up inside of the molding to close up that little bit of play that's still there. I don't like that option because if you have to remove the molding in the future and the clip breaks, you'll have to dig that glue back out of the molding. Alternatively, I'm still searching for other clips from other makes and models of cars that could possibly replace this clip and maybe fit a little bit better. I think the best option that I've come up with is to try and source some OEM clips that are unbroken and in perfect condition, and I would like to pursue doing some 3D scanning and 3D printing of new clips. I will be making more Legend specific videos in the future, as well as other older Japanese projects. If you found this video helpful and informative, show your support by clicking that subscribe button. I don't ask for donations, and I don't promote or endorse any of the tools or products that you see in my videos. I'm open to suggestions on what types of videos you would like to see. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to see on the channel. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep the legend alive.